Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 10. So, in today's chapter, we're going to talk about pricing. And pricing, of course, is one of the four P's and one of the more important of the four P's and one of the most flexible of the four P's. So, the case study that is given is Priceline. And at the time that Priceline came out with their product option. This was brand spanking new. They were giving consumers the option of name your price. Progressive is another one that is also a different pricing kind of model where Progressive tells everyone on their site what their other competitors are pricing at the same time. Another company that I think really does an interesting job on pricing is Airbnb, right? Because, of course, Airbnb is giving you a completely different product for a completely different price. So, all of these companies, the important thing is that they think about what their product is, what their product represents, what's the built-in value associated with their product. And then they come up with a price point that they think matches that value, not only for them, but in the minds of the consumer. And so we're going to talk about coming up with price ceilings, figuring out what is a price floor, looking at reference pricing, all of these things, because price is so critical in the 4P or the marketing mix. So, what is price? Think about price as the money charged for a product or service or the sum of the values that consumers exchange for the benefit of having or using the product. So when we think of value, we think of benefits versus cost. And one of the costs from a functional perspective is price. But a cost can also mean time, energy, convenience, all of those are costs. But we're going to be talking about a specific cost of price in today's lecture. And as you see, price has many names, right? Rent is a price. A commission is a price. Interest rates is a price. Tuition. I think you guys know better than most that that's a price. Salary, wage, taxes. Those are all different names for essentially what is a price. Good. And I think having dynamic pricing on the web, where a dynamic pricing means pricing that you can adjust. And if you have it on the web, that gives you a lot of flexibility because if you have pricing in a store, you've already parted with that product and the retailer, so the Target, the Whole Foods, the Rayleighs, they all now own that product. So really, they are in control of the pricing. Now, they may reflect pricing that you gave them when they bought the product, but you as the manufacturer, as the producer of this product, you don't have any price option once it leaves you to one of your sellers or resellers in your value chain. So when you are willing and able to sell directly to the consumer, then you have on the internet, you have dynamic pricing. And dynamic pricing allows a lot of, flexibility. And people like it because you get that flexibility. So just as price is the most flexible, there are a lot of mistakes that we can make with price, right? We can price it too low. We can price it too high. I think a lot of times as consumers, we think, oh, pricing too high is the biggest problem. But sometimes you price too low. And if you price too low, then you lose out on potential profits. So you really want to be in a situation. Okay, let me think of an example. You really want to be in a situation where you price it at the right point. For example, JCPenney. Every week you go to JCPenney, there's some kind of sale. Okay. I think their strategy at first was to bring customers into the door with this notion of a sale. But over time, repeatedly having a sale over and over and over, you run the risk that consumers will not buy your product until a next sale comes around. So you have to be so careful about pricing based on sales and reduced pricing because you want to make sure your consumer understands the value associated with your price point. And sometimes when we're looking at what that price point would be, we have different objectives, right? And so your pricing, because it's one of the four P's, because it's a part of the marketing mix, must make sense for your positioning. This is a mantra I have. Four P's must make sense for your positioning. So if you're at a country club, you can't price as if you're going to the dollar store, right? It's just completely different. When I am buying something at Ross, I don't expect to have the same prices as something as Dillard's or Nordstrom or um, a big department store, because I'm at Ross, and the reason I'm here is because I want that different positioning. I want to get those discount prices. Good. But when we're thinking about what price point we want to go with, we often have to think about what our objectives are. Do we just want to survive in this market? Do we want to maximize our profits in this market? Do we want to be a market share leader, meaning we want to really own a huge part of the market share? So, price, market penetration, or do we want to be perceived as a product quality leader? So that means that it gives us a little bit of flexibility on how we're going to price our product. So if you are really trying to price at the highest point in the market, then you cannot really simply look at functional value. You can't say, okay, come to my restaurant because you're going to get a nutritious meal, you're going to get fine service, you're going to get a choice of three meats for that one price. Yeah, that's all great, but you cannot price at the highest end of the market based on that strategy. You could price midway, where people are going to look at the quality, look at the attributes, and figure out what they are getting for what they are giving up. But when we start talking about really high end pricing, then you have to hit on the emotions. You have to cover all three forms of value: social, functional, and hedonic. Okay? So I think it's important to kind of recognize that companies that are going to be on the high end, they think of how they can position themselves based on a relationship with their consumer. And so when we do that, then we take on kind of non-price positioning. We take on positioning that focuses on emotions, positioning that focuses on status, positioning that focuses on kind of fulfillment and development and self-actualization. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus on the functional attributes. Apple is going to be the price of an Apple computer is sometimes twice, three, four times even the price of most of their close competitors. So they can't really position based on price, because that argument is only going to go so far and say, well, you know, for this price point, your computer is not going to crash. Or I can say, well, if I have a PC, even if it crashes, I can still buy two for the one time that you have an Apple. So instead, they have to position based on, you're going to be a part of the iLife. Look at the sleek design. We're so innovative. It's user friendly. They can't just focus on, things associated with what you get for the price point, because they're never going to win that argument. Now, one of the factors you have to consider when you are pricing, however, despite the fact that you may be pricing based on emotions, you may be pricing based on none of all of these non-cost based kind of components, you always have to consider your cost when you are pricing. You always have to consider, what are my costs, and what is my do I need to target at a costing that is lower in order to price point? Because the reality is, even with high-end products, there's a maximum to what you can charge. The market says, you know what, you can charge up to 100,000 for this, but nobody is going to pay 200,000 for this. Or maybe you will find some people who will pay 200,000 for this, but it's going to be so small that it's not going to be worth it. So you have to really consider, a number of things when you are thinking about the price. When you think about your costs, you have to think about, are these costs fixed costs? Are these costs variable costs? What are my total costs? So of course, your fixed costs are going to be inputs that, whether you produce one item or you produce 25 of those items, it's the same. I always try to explain the notion of, if you've ever done printing of t-shirts. So when you're printing t-shirts, if you print one t-shirt, it's going to be the same in cost almost as if you print 25 or 50 t-shirts. Why is that? Because your first set of t-shirts are really covering the price of the screen, of the, the molds, right? A lot of the setup costs that it doesn't really matter how many you print. I really have to have the initial screen. I have to have some initial molds, etc. And when I'm printing one or I'm printing 200, I have to have those setup costs. Similar to, if I'm running a factory and you're working 9 to 5, well, I have certain electricity costs in this factory. I have to pay rent for this factory. So whether you produce 2,000 or you produce 2,000 widgets or 10 widgets, I still have to pay rent for this factory. I still have to pay electricity. Now, some may argue, well, if you're producing 2,000, then you might have a smaller factory. Maybe, but it depends on the equipment for that widget, right? Maybe the equipment for that widget is quite large. And so even if I had even if I'm only producing 10, I still need that large piece of equipment. So those are your fixed costs. Your variable costs are costs that are going to vary depending on how much output. So, the ingredients. So if I'm making a meal for a dinner party for 20, the ingredients are going to be different in quantity than if I'm making dinner for a dinner party of 5, right? So those costs are going to vary. The more people you have that are inputting into this, then the more your costs are going to go up. And maybe you have more people if you're selling more different types of products. So the reality is, when it comes to variable, think of your costs that are going to vary depending on the amount of product that you output. And then when we combine them together, we get total costs. So the idea is that when you have a fixed size plant, then you have one set of cost. But when you have a plant that varies depending on production, so let's say, again, coming back to the example, I'm producing 20,000 widgets instead of 2 widgets. Well, maybe I need more people to package the 20,000 when they come off the conveyor belts than if I'm only producing 20 or 10. I don't need as many people. If Amazon is shipping out, 2,000 packets a day, 2,000 packages a day, then they need more staff than if they are shipping out 50 packages a day. Just it's going to be a cost that varies, and so it's something to think about. Then you have the experience curve, and that speaks to how you have learned about producing this particular item. So as time passes and as the number of items increase, then your cost to making each item decreases. So, when I just became a newly minted professor, it would take me a longer time to get ready for class. It would take me a longer time to come up with a new class, to come up with the slides, to figure out how to lecture. I have to do a ton of research on the front end. And so from a time perspective, it was a lot more costly. But as I continue to teach the class over and over, then I have less need to, I know the material so much better that I don't have to spend as much time in the preparation. I'm going to update myself, look at look up some things on the internet to make sure I have some examples that make sense and know what's going on. But I'm not spending the deep amount of time that I would have spent when I'm first putting the class together. And then when I'm teaching, I have gone through this over and over and over. So every time I teach a class, it takes less and less time, even with me still being current and so forth and so on, than when I first produced the class. So as experience increases, as you produce more, your cost per unit should come down, and that cost is time, is money, etc., etc. And then you have to think about the organization itself. What is the nature of the organization? Who sets the price? In a small company, maybe it's the CEO. In a large company, maybe it's an entire division. And then sometimes in a B2B or in an internal employee situation, you negotiate on price. You think, you do your research and you try to get an understanding of where's the wiggle room on this price? Because maybe one group thinks there's no way we can price these pairs of jeans at $40 a pop. Nobody's going to buy it. Somebody else said, oh, I know we totally can. I remember when I was selling my house, my husband and I had a difference of opinion. He thought There's no way we can sell this house at that price point. And I was like, no, we can, because I've seen, a number of other houses that don't have what we have that we're able to sell. And so the reality is you can't just come up with a price. You have to know that the market is going to support it or not, right? And a huge part of it is, what are the perceptions of the value? And keep in mind, the perception is everything, because I may, one person, and so you have to understand who your consumer is, because one person, I may look at a Louis Vuitton suitcase and say, why the heck would I spend $10,000 on that suitcase? And somebody else might say 10,000. That's a deal. I totally would spend 10,000 on a Louis Vuitton suitcase. For me, I'm like, I could buy the whole car. Why would I? There's no amount of leather quality that could condone, explain, legitimize me spending that kind of money on something like that. But then for me, I don't have the kind of income that would allow me to make those kind of purchases in a cavalier fashion. So I have to really think long and hard about that purchase. So I am not in the Louis Vuitton target market. So they don't really have to care about whether or not I can afford it, because I'm not buying their goods. And so they price it at a price point for people who are purchasing it. And then you have to think about, okay, so who are my competitors? How much competition do I have? People talk about pure competition, but how realistic is that? Do we really have pure competition? Or is it a monopoly? Or is it one or two? So it's not quite a monopoly where it's only one, but it's one or two. So it's similar to a monopoly. Or is it, an oligarchic kind of situation where it's a group of folks, where it's, it's not one, but it's like five people that control. I think of pricing in cell phones like that. Oligopolistic, because how many companies are there? There aren't that many companies, and they all agree. If you think back years ago, they would sell cell phones, and you would essentially pay a down payment that was what, $200 or something like that. And then you wouldn't be paying every month for the cell phone. You would have paid $200 for the cell phone, and then you pay monthly for the cost of the service, right? So you knew you would have to pay to something as much as $299 for a cell phone. But you could get a nice cell phone for $199, and then that was it. You don't have to pay anymore. And so the idea with that was that they're doing bundle pricing, right? They're taking a hit on the cost of the cell phone because they know they're gonna murder you on the subscription. So every month you're gonna go over, or you're gonna have this add-on and this tax, and you want to get insurance and blah 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 blah. And by the time they're done with you, you would have paid for that cell phone a million times over. But now they're like, why should we even take a hit? Why should we even cover the cost of the cell phone? Let them cover the cost of the cell phone. What we're going to do is we're going to bill it into the price on a monthly basis so that they don't feel it as much. So on the jump, they're not spending $199 on the cell phone, but they are spending $24.99 or $36.97 or whatever on a monthly basis. And at the end of the day, we're paying $1,000, $900 or $1,000 for a cell phone, which is a crazy concept, right? And so this couldn't fly if all of the cell phone companies weren't on board. Because if Sprint decided, oh no, we're still gonna stick with the $199 or $299, and then you don't have to pay anything else, then everybody would be with Sprint, which would be unfortunate, because I had to leave Sprint because the service is so bad. But you see what I'm saying, right? And so you have to think about, are you in a position to, as a business, to have an oligarchy, to have monopolistic, or is it like a pure monopoly where you're the only game in town, so you could price it however you want to price it? But I always say, if you do something like that, you kind of open yourself to the competition, right? Because for a long time, taxis are the only ones they price at a particular price point. And what was your alternative? That you would take the bus or you'd buy a car. And for many people, like, okay, so that's not an option. Maybe I don't want to rent a bus. I don't want to rent a car. I'm not taking the bus. I gotta grab a cab, especially if you're on a foreign place, if you're outside of your home city. Well, a lot of people found that the rates they charged were outrageous, but they couldn't really do anything about it. Now, once Uber came along, then they were able to offer price points at so much cheaper than what a cab costs, right? And so sometimes you're looking for the value in the market and then you can price your products accordingly. But the important thing is you have to know and understand who your consumers are. Who are your consumers? What do they value? And what's the elasticity? And I was just explaining elasticity to a friend the other day, and I was saying, okay, so there are certain things the demand is not going to move depending on the price. Even if it's price high, people are going to still buy it. Cigarettes, for example. Okay, people who are smoking, the price of the cigarette is not going to, dissuade them from purchasing the cigarette. On the other hand, there are some products where if you have a very high price, people are not going to buy it. So, fruits and veggies. You know, for example, I love mangoes. I'm from the Caribbean, but it is hard to find a good mango in the United States of America, even if you're in Miami, right? So, sometimes Sprouts or Rayleigh's would have sales on mangoes, and I will buy a lot of mangoes. But I have seen mangoes as expensive in Nugget, for example, as like $4 for a mango. I'm not paying $4 for a mango. It's just not happening, right? And so for me, my demand, my ability, my interest in buying something is going to seriously move depending on the price of that mango. That is a very elastic type of demand where my need, want, desire for it is purely based on, well, I might have a desire consistently, but I'm only going to purchase it if it is decreasing in price, right? And so, what do you always have to do? You cannot price in isolation. You always have to consider the competitors. Are the competitors pricing above? Are they pricing below? And that's very important. You have to always consider what the competitors are pricing. And then you also have to think about what is the nature of the product. Is it a low price, low margin product? Is it a high price, high margin product? What is the competition doing? Now, keep in mind, there are all different approaches for this because what companies may do, and I mentioned bundle pricing before, is they know there is a lot of wiggle room with one aspect of the product, but not a lot on the other. Give an example. Movie theater costs. Well, if you go to the movies, then what you pay $20 for a ticket. And maybe that really doesn't cover the price of the rental. And so the movie theater is not making any money off of the price of the ticket. So where are they going to get you? Soda, M&Ms, popcorn. I mean, consider what you are paying for popcorn. Literally, people are paying $7 and $8 for a bag of popcorn. That's pure insanity, right? A bag of popcorn is costing them pennies, maybe less than 10 cents for that bag of popcorn from a cost perspective. Look at the potential markup that they're making on the popcorn. They're not really making any money on the movie ticket, but they are making money on the popcorn. They're murdering you on the M&Ms. They are killing you on the soda. Soda is even worse. That's even cheaper, right? Even on the cups and the straws, that's so cheap for them. And so again, pennies, and you're paying $6, $7, $8 for M&Ms. You're paying so much money. So it's important to kind of think about where are my margins? What is a high margin product? And that's why you see sometimes people wrap services around products because, like a car dealership, maybe they're not making so much money on the car itself, but when you come for service, that's when they're going to get you, right? So that's the idea. And then you can't do this in a vacuum because you have to know, okay, so can people go to other movie theaters and pay half of the price for popcorn? Are they going to go there? What differentiates my movie theater from the others? And then now, a few years ago, there was a complete switch, right? There was a complete switch from what movie theaters were pricing and what the inside of the movie theater looked like to now, where they took out a bunch of seats, made it much more luxurious. You could lean back in the movie theater, and then they have, high definition and 3D and all these and these different price points. So it's something to be aware of when you're thinking of pricing. And then you have all these other environmental factors. What are my supplies, the inputs that I'm using to make this product? How are those things priced, and how is that affecting my ability to price? Will my consumers think I'm doing price gouging if it is that I price beyond a certain amount? What is my wiggle room on the price front? Does the government have any limitations on how much I can price? Or are they open to me pricing at a higher level, or et cetera, et cetera? So you have to think about the competition. You have to think about your production costs. You have to think about your inputs. You have to think about your price floor. But you also have to think about what are the consumers considering when it comes to a value proposition. All of these things go into how you think of price. And so there's cost based pricing, then there's cost plus pricing. And so when we talk about cost plus, we think of our costs and then we add a markup on top of that. So maybe our markup is a 20% markup, a 50% markup. Jewelry, some items lend themselves a much bigger markup. Jewelry is like a 400% markup. Another thing that is I think criminal, eyewear. Eyewear is like thousands of percentage in terms of markup potentially, especially when you start getting into designer eyewear. So you have to be aware of these different approaches to pricing. So when we're thinking of cost-based pricing, we always have to look at different formulas. And so here I'm giving an example where, let's say our variable costs are $20. We expect to sell over 100,000 units. We have fixed costs, so no matter what, we have fixed costs of 500,000, and then we're going to have a sales markup of 20%. So how do we do it? We look at the variable cost, that's $20, plus our fixed cost, that's 500,000. We divide that by 100,000 because that is unit sales, and then we're going to get $25 per unit. So that is going to be the cost for us to produce each unit. And then to get our market price, what we do is we say, okay, so we have that unit cost, which is the $25. Below, as a denumerator, we're going to have 1 minus our desired return on sales. So that 20%, so that's 0.20. And then we're going to get 31.25. So essentially, we're looking at that's going to be, what we are selling it to whoever we're selling it for. Now, that can be from a manufacturing standpoint, that's our market price. And then the reseller or the retailer is going to add some more onto that. And I'm going to give you some examples of how you can look at producing. I'm going to give you some examples of some formulas and some cost-based pricing problems that you can solve. Okay, so when we're doing cost-based pricing, we also have to know what our break-even analysis is and what's our target profit pricing, meaning at how many units do we need to sell before we start making money, right? Because remember, because of our fixed costs, we're gonna have fixed costs or sunk costs. We're gonna be kind of in the negative. We're gonna be in a hole. So how many units do we have to sell before we can start seeing a profit? And that's important because we start thinking to ourselves, damn, I'm going to have to sell a lot of these units. And there isn't a market to sell all of these units. And so you have to think about that. So a break-even charts looks at the total cost, and then it's going to look at variable costs. And it's going to give us some understanding of where is that break-even point. And you have to know that break-even point is important because it starts telling you, okay, so above anything you sell above this, you're good to go, profits. But below this, you're not going to make any money. So break even, that is a very important formula that you need to be aware of how to calculate. And so when you look at cost-based, you have to compare cost-based pricing to, let's say, value-based pricing. So with cost-based pricing, you think about your product that you want to sell. You think about all of the inputs, all of the things that you're going to need to make this product. So that's going to tell you your costs. Then you calculate the price, you add an additional markup for value, and then you sell it to your consumer. But with value-based pricing, you start off with your consumer because you're saying to yourself, these are the things that my consumer values, and therefore I can price it at once I know what my consumers value, I can price it at this point, and then I work everything back from there. So, and then I know what are the inputs. So, if it is that I know my consumers value a pair of shoes that is leather, I have to make a product that is based in leather. So if I'm looking from the other perspective, maybe I decide I want to make a product that's, not leather. It's plastic. It's, leatherette, also known as plastic. And so it's a different process completely, whether you're talking about value based or price or cost based. And so the important thing too is when we're looking at value based pricing, recognize we as marketers have a lot of control over how much people will value our product, what people will value it at. So we start, we can think anything you think of, a meal, right? A meal. At the end of the day, it's all doing the same thing, providing some form of nutrition. You can spend hundreds on a meal. You can spend a few dollars on a meal. Both of them still filling you. And in fact, the more expensive might fill you less. But how do we differentiate? It's all based on what your value perception is, right? And then we recognize that different markets will have different value perceptions. And so you want to make sure that your value perceptions out there in the minds of the consumer matches with your price point. And it's the same concept as positioning, matching with the 4Ps. So then you have competition-based pricing, right? So competition-based pricing, the idea here is that I am going to price based on what the competition is offering. I'm not going to price below or above, or if I do, it's going to be slightly below and slightly above. But the idea is I'm not going to be so far below them or so far above them. Competition-based pricing is you try to think about what the going rate is and come in at that same level, just above or just below. And we have a lot, I think for the most part, a good example of competition-based pricing is your cell phones, coming back to your cell phones, because they are just about, they all are plans very, very similar. You're not going to find one company that is super expensive, one company that's super cheap. If you are super cheap, it's completely different. Maybe you bring your own phone, etc., etc. The last thing I want to talk about with pricing, and I think this is so important, is this idea of reference pricing, right? So when we talk about reference pricing, it speaks to the fact that most consumers really don't know the exact price of stuff. So they have a reference price idea. What does that mean? It means that maybe I don't know the exact cost of a loaf of bread, but I know it shouldn't be more than $7, and it probably is not going to be less than $1. And so that's my reference. I think it's in that realm, it's in that range. And so once you come, and I think also in addition, so I know it's not above that, it's not below that, and I think it's around $3-4. And so you have to know, as a producer, as a manufacturer, as a reseller, you have to know how is it that people calculate or think about my product. So when they think about my product, what is their reference as it pertains to pricing? And knowing that is a huge step on the battle to being successful in your pricing approach. See you in the next chapter.